Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. My name is Emma, and I've got a double episode here with Lorcan and Danilo, and we're going to be talking about the idea of sustainability and specifically within the insurance industry. But before I get going with all the questions that I've got for you both, can you guys do a quick introduction?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Danilo, and I am the Group Head of Innovation at Generali, so in charge of all the innovation activities of Generali across the globe. Before joining Generali, I had a career in reinsurance mainly, stint to work together with Lorcan, and I'm happy to be here today.
Yeah, great. That's very short and sweet, Danilo. Excellent. So
I like it.
There's an awful lot more you could say. I'm Lorcan. I'm Irish. I'm here in wet and windy Dublin today. My career, I started in 1998, working in-house as a consultant with insurance and reinsurance companies in Ireland, Italy, Germany, Switzerland, the UK. Most of my work has been on strategy, transformation, and innovation projects. Danilo mentioned we started working together on a global innovation program in 2016 with Hanover Re. I think the company wanted these 24 brilliant young minds. They got 22, and Danilo and me, like the oldest and least hair, although Danilo's still growing up back there a little bit. Looking good. Just over 2 years ago, I took some time out to study for a master's in sustainable development, University College Dublin, in partnership with the United Nations. And I think it was just after the COVID-19 pandemic, and obviously climate change, and I just wanted to get a scientific understanding of what sustainability means. So I looked at everything through an insurance lens, and I suppose I wanted to understand how insurance and reinsurance companies can blend profit and purpose. How can they continue delivering commercial value, but also generate greater societal impact? So that's really what's brought me to this topic. So maybe back to you, Emma.
I love that the introduction started with I'm Irish.
That's important. That's important. That's important thing. I should have worn a green jumper. Yeah, I should have.
I feel like we're going to have fun with the two of you guys playing off one another as we go through these questions. So I'm going to keep both of you up while I maybe direct questions at one of you so that you guys can kind of work together to talk us through some of the work that you've done. And so, Lorcan, kind of coming off of both your industry experience as well as the studying that you've done recently, you have this nice broad perspective of sustainability, the challenges that we have, as well as some of the solutions maybe that we can start building towards. So can you share some of the key areas where you think the insurance industry and maybe leaders like Danilo can kind of help us actually contribute to this idea of sustainability within the industry? And then maybe you guys, again, can kind of play back and forth on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think Danilo will have a load of real world examples of how Generali is delivering that commercial value and societal impact. But maybe just take a step back and, what do we mean by sustainability? Some people talk about sustainability, others use language of ESG, and then there's sustainable development. And during my studies, we use the sustainable development goals that guide our work research. So maybe just talk about that for a minute. So we have 17 sustainable development goals, 169 targets. They were developed and negotiated over a 2-year period by public and private sector organizations. And then back in 2015, they were adopted by all 193 member states of the UN. And the SDGs provide us with a common framework and language to understand all these societal challenges across its 4 pillars of economic prosperity, social inclusion, environmental sustainability, and good governance. So that's from a starting position. That's how I define sustainable development. Because again, it's that common language and framework, whereas sustainability and ESG, they're broad terms, and different people, different companies, they just interpret it differently. And so another point about sustainable development goals is that the central promise at the heart of the SDGs to leave no one behind. And this is where there's a really nice, compelling symmetry to the guiding principle of insurance, that many pay for the few. And by this, we mean that many people and organizations pay insurance premiums so that a few people, families, communities, can receive financial support when they experience unwanted events like ill health or natural catastrophes. So that's what there is an intersection, a connection between the SDGs and insurance. And maybe just before Danilo jumps in with some Generali examples, Just a few numbers down here, just to bring it to life a little bit. So SDG 1 is about no poverty. And here, there's almost 700 million people live in extreme poverty today. And 3.4 billion people are vulnerable to falling into poverty. And 4 billion people do not have access to any type of social protection whatsoever. So these are big, huge numbers. And this is where there's a role for voluntary private insurance solutions to plug some of the gap. So if some people are able to afford insurance premiums, they should be allowed and encouraged to do so that when they experience these unwanted events, they can access this private support. That allows the stretched, publicly funded social protection systems to direct their finite resources to those people most in need. Like SDG 3 is good health and well-being. Again, universal health coverage is critical. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted, acutely highlighted how fragile and underfunded our healthcare systems are. So again, it's important to have voluntary private insurance solutions and to encourage them as much as possible, so that when people have the private health insurance, experience ill health, they can access financial support, private healthcare services, so that publicly funded healthcare systems can focus their resources onto the most vulnerable populations. And finally, SDG 13 is all about climate action. Insurance can play important roles on the mitigation adaptation sides. Can support the energy transition. Decarbonizing, removing fossil fuels, crowding in private capital towards renewable energy projects, but also on the adaptation side. Like we saw recently, Aon estimated that the economic losses last year was $380 billion, but only about 120 billion were insured. So again, there's a massive protection gap there. And this is where insurance solutions have a role to play. So at a really high level, we have all these big societal challenges, and insurance can play a complementary role. Like it's not public or private, it's public and private. So maybe, Danilo, you can talk more to that private aspect, but maybe I've spoken about the SDGs, but how do you and your role define sustainability?
Yeah, no, thanks, Lorcan. I share a lot of what you said, and maybe actually to go a step back, right? Why? In my very short introduction, I said that I'm leading innovation efforts. So why is innovation in Generali concerned with sustainability and social impact? It starts a little bit with a personal passion and conviction of mine. Even in my previous company, before I joined Generali, I saw that the challenges that facing society and the industry are so big that there's no player, public or private, that can solve them on their own, as you just rightly said. And so I started seeing, how insurers or reinsurance can go beyond what they currently do, right, to support various societal problems, right, to solve some of these problems. And in addition to the various activities that were already ongoing, I spotted that there was an area where sustainability, social impact, and innovation could really work together, which basically is kind of ensuring that each insurance company enter as protagonists the social entrepreneurship scene, right? So it means really combining entrepreneurship, innovation, so creation of new business models, new products, new ventures, with social impact, right? So it's not about charity anymore only. It's about really making sure that we are able to build new business models, which are sooner or later that we need to follow the usual cycle of getting to break even and then becoming profitable. Whose primary goal, however, is not that, but is the positive social impact that they have towards one or more sector or sectors of the population. Right? So this is a little bit how we, as innovation, we see sustainability, in a sense that we see it as, first of all, a moral obligation of anyone who is active in the industry at the moment, but also as an opportunity, right, which is important. So it's a way to go beyond traditional support, as I said, right, to disadvantaged groups, to see them as also potentially future clients. These things are not in contradiction, right? Because if you only support certain groups by donating money, there is always going to be a limit, right, to how much you can do. If instead you find a way of supporting these people, or fighting climate change, whatever, so really talking here very broadly about positive social impact. If you find a way of doing these things by building business models around them, the help that you can give is potentially limitless, right? As long as you find a way to make it work, is extremely scalable, and that's why we think it's much more impactful than just simply following previous path. Obviously, there is always going to be certain groups or certain problems that are so niche or so tricky, so difficult that you will have to help them with charitable donations. But we think this is a minority, and everything else could be impacted by something bigger.
Can I jump in there, Danilo, just on that particular point? So there was one really good point you made there about it's not donations. I think there are some people within the private sector who believe that sustainability is just an evolution of corporate social responsibility. It's about let's just donate a bit more money. There's other groups that are talking about sustainability as it's compliance, ticking a box, or as risk management. They're all good, important stuff. But what you're speaking about here is innovating new products and services for vulnerable populations, providing them with access to insurance solutions that they don't have today, which is this protection gap. And some of those figures I shared a minute ago, there's massive gaps between what's needed and what's available.
Absolutely.
So your role is very much focused on innovating and scaling as well. So people know innovation is new ideas, but just what about scaling, Danilo?
Yeah, that's that's a good question, right? As I said before, the opportunity of the tricky thing is to find, obviously, to build business models that are at the same time financially sustainable and they actually have a positive social impact. I think once you find those, then it's actually not impossible to scale them, because unfortunately there's a lot of groups of people that are not doing extremely well at the moment, right? And you test the way that we do this, right? In good innovation spirit, we try whatever we try to do. We obviously try to do first in one place, right? In a limited experiment, we're testing it, and then if it works, we expand it and we try to scale it as much as possible, right? This is also important for a group like Generali, that we are quite of a decentralized company. So it's people like me in the head office, but then actually the business units are all local. So it's important to find business models, sustainable business models that work in many different places, because obviously there are patterns of troubles, right, all around in Europe, beyond Europe, and stuff.
And I think when going back to that scalability idea, the unfortunate truth is that oftentimes social supports aren't as scalable if there isn't the incentive of people making money off of them. So when we're able to innovate in a way that drives revenue and supports these initiatives, we're going to see wider adoption. And once a couple of companies have figured that out, I think that's really where we start to see the ball roll in terms of full adoption of these types of practices. So
can I just jump in on that though, Emma? So you talk about like microinsurance solutions over the last 10, 15 years supporting vulnerable populations in the developing world. Okay, so there's been hundreds of these microinsurance solutions that have been kicked off, but very few have been scaled. And the reason is that they've relied on premium subsidies to actually pay the premiums. But these solutions haven't evolved into self-sustaining financial models that are actually self-perpetuating. And this is the problem. It's about going back to that point about something needs to be financially sustainable in order for it to continue delivering value, because you can't rely on just donations to pay for insurance premiums. And this is where there is a bit of a challenge. And this is why it's important that large private insurance companies like Generali want to play a role in this space.
Yeah. And this is a good point, Lorcan, because to ensure that they really become scalable, that not relying only on donations is super important. Because as I said before, otherwise, at some point this money is going to be limited, right? It's not going to be endless amounts of donations, right? Instead, if they are self-supported, financially sustainable, they can theoretically, as I said, right, scale endlessly, right? And the point, that you made, Emma, earlier about incentives, this is fundamental as well, right? Because there's a lot of issues in making this work, right? One, though, of the many issues is obviously conflicting interests inside companies, right? So there is always a scarcity of resources, scarcity of people, money, time, and so if you try to push these social business models, and there are no incentives for all the very different people that you need to involve in a company, in a large multinational like Generali, then it's going to be hard, right? Because there's always going to be another project that is potentially more profitable, potentially more, potentially closer to the objective that they need to pursue, right? So I always say, right, at some point we should also try to see how we can define these goals and how we can also translate them into hard incentives for managers and everybody involved. For example, now that we have targets in our scorecards, in our performance management tool that were unthinkable 10 years ago. No, I'm thinking of stuff related to diversity and inclusion that we are lucky to have them now. At some point, we should also try to possibly have incentives that that ensure that people actually dedicate their time to these kind of projects.
So now I want to real quick because keep going for
okay.
I'm gonna stop you for a second, and I think that this conversation will continue. But I want to give people context of maybe one of the projects that you and your team have worked on, Danilo, to kind of like, instead of talking in theory, talk through like a project and some of the lessons that you've learned. And I think naturally some of this discussion will continue on there as well. So could you share a specific example of where maybe partnerships and working towards one of these initiatives has kind of come together, and what you and your team have learned about fostering successful collaboration and also maybe doing some of these things like scaling?
Sure. So one example which I think is interesting is something we started looking at shortly after I joined Generali, and after I realized that we have a foundation that is very strong and very modern in the way that they think. It's called the human safety net. They are a foundation, right? So their main goals are clearly defined, and they've track record of supporting fantastic charities over the years and stuff. And their main goals is to spot segments of vulnerable populations that can benefit from their help via donations mainly. However, because of everything that we just said and everything also that had been in the making before, we realized that we could work together to spot areas where donations were only going as far as they were and where we could go beyond that, right? One of the verticals, right, of the areas of focus of the human safety net is migrants and refugees, and so we started looking, and because at the time we started looking at this was at the beginning of the Ukraine war, so where loads of Ukrainian refugees coming into Western Europe, in addition to there being always an influx of people from other countries. We started looking at Germany, that they seem to have obviously a large influx of both migrants and refugees, to see what were the problems that these people were encountering when coming into the country. So obviously they have a whole host of issues, unfortunately, but also a lot of things that seem they could be tackled by Generali, right? So problems of financial inclusion, and so we said, okay, let's see whether we can build something around this, and whether we can experiment with the social entrepreneurship. Then, to make the long story short, we segmented the various issues that the migrants have when they are in Germany, especially in the first months and years, and we spotted a series that we thought we could solve by building a new venture, which now we're calling Migrasure, that will become a platform for financial inclusions of migrants and refugees, which means offering basic financial instruments so that they can live their life as other Germans or Europeans do, or at least receiving basic financial services to make sure that they can have a minimum support in that sense. We are starting from the very first problem that they encountered, which was the one of finding an accommodation. Right after an initial period of support from the government, they're asked to look for their own accommodation, and there the problem is often not. Goes a little bit beyond being able to afford the monthly rent. It's about, for example, providing a deposit that they can, first of all, that they have, and they can say trusted by the landlords. So then we are providing them now with a financial guarantee. on the deposit, so that they can safely look for accommodation and be granted one. This is only the beginning, right? The future is all about building on these basic financial, banking, and insurance products, right? From very simple ones, starting a private liability insurance, to more complex one, disability, etc. Right? All of these obviously has to be made very affordable, right? Very cheap, and at the same time, it will have to be sustainable by Generali, right? So even though follows the usual logic of a new venture at the beginning, obviously you are not profitable, you need to make sure that there is a sustainable track that leads you also to profitability and sustainability of all these. So obviously we've learned a lot from other attempts on microinsurance, as Lorcan was mentioning, that we did in developing countries. It's interesting, to try to see what has been done in developing countries and what you can replicate in Europe instead. And this is obviously still in the making, right? So we're not sure whether and how it will succeed, but it's looking very promising. It's also looking promising the fact that this is not something that Generali is doing on its own. You mentioned partnerships. This is, first of all, again, a collaboration between innovation and foundation, which is new and not trivial in a large corporate, but especially is a collaboration with a venture studio that focuses only on the creation of social impact ventures, right? They are also relatively new, so it's also one of the first attempts for them, and we're working very well with them, with a distribution partner in Germany that it's a traditional distribution partner, so they have also been experimenting. This is something new for them, and also technology providers, right? So the technology here is very important, because if you want to keep costs down, you need to make this as efficient and as seamless as possible. You cannot rely on traditional models of distributing our products that add obviously a lot of overlay costs.
Danilo, can I ask you a question? Yeah, because we've discussed this before, and I think this is super exciting, compelling. Well, I think what struck me is that we talk about innovation. Many insurance companies, they innovate internally, and it's just they groupthink. We're just going around circles. But what's most interesting about MicroSure is that your foundation actually sourced a number of NGOs to collaborate with, and you had workshops with migrant refugees and vulnerable migrants, and it was those groups that identified this need. It wasn't Generali staff saying we have an idea.
Absolutely.
So you partner with these NGOs, and it's the actual people, the beneficiaries, who have identified this is what they need. I think that's what's unique and different.
Yeah, this is essential, actually. Thanks, Lorcan, for bringing this up. This is super important, right? Exactly. When we were kind of like, looking at, so what are the actual issues of these migrants and refugees? Well, let's ask them, right? This is really something that is, as you know, very important in innovation. Start from the client, start from the customer, start from the problem. What are the real problems? Not things that we imagine may be problems, then maybe they're not, right? And so exactly here, the collaboration and this excellent relationship that the Human Safety Net has with a whole lot of very important NGOs that provide essential, fantastic services for migrants and refugees was important, because we could really get in touch with also, the interesting thing is that we found out there were also slightly different issues depending on the origins of the refugees, for example, whether they're Ukrainian, Syrian, Iraqis or something, right? So again, the strength of the NGOs to bring these people together and allowing us to really understand from them directly firsthand what the main issues were and what could be most helpful to them, even though this is kind of, a temporary partnership, right? Because NGOs are NGOs, so they cannot really become part of the business model. But again, they were in the journey, they were fundamental. Without them, we wouldn't be here now. Absolutely.
I think it's just a super interesting example of partnership between the private sector and public sector. And just linking back to the SDGs and climate change, the UN estimates that there could be up to 1 billion climate refugees by 2050. So every country around the world is going to need insurance solutions to support these populations if climate change continues on its path of destruction. So it's great to know.
So where I want to take it for our last question, because it's me, I have to ask about technology. So I want to kind of come to you, Danilo, and Lorcan, I'd love your feedback on this as well, to talk about like where you've been deploying tools and technology to kind of help create these commercial and societal value propositions that we've been talking about, and maybe get some thoughts from you guys on where you think the opportunity lies with generative AI for creating sustainability and kind of continuing to scale these efforts. So maybe Danilo, will come to you first, and then Lorcan will pop over to your opinions as well.
Yes, I'm sure Lorcan has more to say about this than I do. No, no. So first thing to say is obviously technology, absolutely, as I shortly mentioned earlier, is fundamental to make these ventures work. However, we never think about technology first, right? Otherwise, it's easy to make this mistake of falling in love with a technology or with a solution that, however, is looking for a problem, right? So we should really start from problems. What are the issues, right? And once we've spotted the issues, like we did for MigraSure with the participation of migrants, then we started building the solution around it, right? That tackles that problem. Obviously, nowadays, anytime you're trying to build something new, there is going to be a technological component to it, right? But really, it depends on a case basis, right? So it's sometimes it's I don't know, the underlying platform that needs to be something completely new that we don't have. Sometimes it's something that is customer facing that will be a new bot or something. Sometimes it's just the cloud where we work on. Sometimes we experiment, right, with new technology. We've been experimenting recently. Before we experimented a bit with the metaverse, it wasn't very successful. Now we're experimenting with generative AI, which is a bit more promising. Generative AI, for example, now this is interesting, right? Because one of the challenges that you have with migrants, as I said, they come from all over, right? And so then you have a lot of different languages that are not widely spoken in Europe, right? So whenever then you are trying to simplify and condense the messages that you want to give. So, for example, what is MigraSure? What can you buy now with MigraSure? What will you get? How do you trigger the claim if you have one? This is all relatively complex information. The one you need to simplify. Second, if it's in their own language, better than if it's in English or in French or in German or Italian, right? And so this is something that is much easier now, right? You can just basically write this information in one language, have generative AI translate it simultaneously, obviously checking still because there's a lot of mistakes and stuff, but it's super simplified. In general, though, however, as I said before, technology helps us to, for example, create products that are mobile only, for example, right? Which again reduces a lot of overlay, reduces a lot of costs, and enables us really to keep the costs of all parts of insurance value chain, rather than it adds up as low as possible in all the steps and all the components that we need to ensure that these are really affordable and at the same time eventually profitable for Generali.
Maybe I'll jump in there, Danilo. So just going back to the research portion of my recent studies, I interviewed 30 senior global public and private sector executives about the intersection of insurance and the SDGs. And what was interesting is that they overwhelmingly believe that data analytics and digital technology solutions are key to powering progress towards the SDGs. Mm-hmm. But even indeed, many of them said that delivering these solutions is impossible without technology. So technology is that scaling. That's the I won't say secret sauce, but technology can help us scale these solutions to much greater number of people at marginal costs. We see like parametric insurance solutions, through those data and analytics tools, they're bridging the protection gap for some natural catastrophe risks, which is great, enabled by, again, data analytics. And as you said, micro insurance solutions are bringing insurance to vulnerable populations for the first time, like over 1 billion people in the last 10, 15 years. But it's those feature phones and smartphones that are enabling that. But I think just the one point that, again, I've spoken about this a few times, digital progress isn't inherently positive. It's not all good. Exactly. So it's the negative spillover effects we need to be conscious of with generative AI. You have all the potential discrimination. Like these technology solutions can reflect the biases of the people who are developing it. But also we need to remember that there's still, I think it's 2.6, 2.7 billion people who still don't have access to the internet. They don't have access to digital devices, and they don't have digital literacy skills or financial literacy skills. Yes. But as you said, generative AI actually can play a really important role here. So again, maybe just paraphrasing, technology it's a means to an end, but not an end in itself, But generative AI definitely does have potential, more than promise at the moment, but definitely potential to help scale some of these solutions to much larger numbers of people.
Well, I think we could probably say, it's safe to say we could keep talking forever and ever if we wanted to. But I do have to call it a day today. But thank you both so much for joining me and giving us so much to think about, and especially, again, kind of looking at where we can scale these efforts and how we can start to truly make an impact moving forward as an industry. For anybody that's not, make sure that you're following both Danilo and Lorcan on LinkedIn, and feel free to reach out to any of us if you've got questions about the episode. But thank you both so much for joining me, and everybody for watching, and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Leading Change. If you liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe and come back weekly for more expert interviews on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.